just wanted to welcome everybody here and to acknowledge country. We have, I'm at ACU campus, so I'd love to commence the webinar by acknowledging the First Peoples and the traditional owners and custodians of all the countries where we're meeting. Emily Hills and I are on Ngunnawal country. Adam Staples, Dr. Adam Staples, is at Bendigo on Jojo Warren, is that right?
Correct, yes.
And Associate Professor Matt Bauer, delighted to have you two. Matt is at Macquarie Uni, which is the Watamatagal clan of the Darug Nation, so he's in North Ryde in New South Wales, or wherever his precise location is. And we're going to hear from all three today, and they're going to take us through multiple connections. I want to hear from each one of them on their different topics. We'll start with Emily, who will speak about the students that she sees as a teacher educator at the University of Canberra. And then Adam will talk to us about his work as a senior lecturer in arts education at La Trobe. And then Associate Professor Matt Bauer may take us a little bit further into the connections between technology and education and research in both those fields. So I'll ask Emily now to start to share her screen. Thanks, everybody. I'd also like to, just while Emily's getting it ready, as well, to shed a little tear. We should, those of us in Canberra and around about, we should be at our EdTechPosium conference this year, but sadly we are not. But we look forward to meeting next year again face to face, and just a little shout out to those people who are regular possums at the EdTechPosium conference.
Oh, so now I can't get my thing to share. Of course that's what would happen. That's all right. I'll wing it. That's not a problem. Let me do that, and you'll be able to see yourselves. And now you should be able to see my presentation. Is that right? All right. Got there. Gee, what an irony if my technology didn't work. All right. So thanks for inviting me. I was quite honoured and pleasantly surprised to be asked to speak to you all today. The first thing I want to do is to say hi to my mum, who's in the audience. I can't not say hello to my mum. She's showed up as one of the wonderful advisors that works in universities. But what I'm talking about today is, the sort of the intersection of higher education and in-school education, and this kind of problematic notion of this idea of the digital natives in schools and higher education, and just thinking a little bit about the kind of affective mode that kind of takes, and teacher identity and educator identity, and tapping into how school teachers are feeling, how pre-service teachers are feeling in that sort of space. So the problem of the digital native, and I'm going to sort of kind of try and keep to my slides because I tend to wax a little bit lyrical when I get on a track on this conversation, as Penny learned on Monday when we talked about this. But you may or may not have heard of the notion of the digital native, and it's something that crops up in the literature around digital technology in education and more broadly. You know, something that was coined in 2001 and became a kind of catch-all for anybody born after 1980. As we all know, these kind of demarcations of generations are inherently problematic, and this one's no different. So it sort of assumes that anybody born after 1980 was born into a different world, and they kind of have different brains. Their brains work differently because they're born into a world where digital technology has just always existed, and that technological advances have moved quite quickly in that space. But this makes their brains somehow different, and they're digital natives, and they're different from those that came before them, which Prensky affectionately calls digital immigrants. Now already we can see the problematic nature of the language that's being used. there. But my question is, are their brains actually different? What's backing up that assumption? Do they really process information differently to previous generations? And just because they were born into a world saturated with technology, does that actually mean that they're more adept at navigating it? So this is something that I have had to grapple with as a classroom teacher. So I was a high school English teacher before I moved into higher education and teacher education. And this assumption that we can just, if we don't know how to use the technology, this discourse around, oh, well, if you don't know how to use your smartphone, just give it to your grandkid. They'll be able to help you use it, because somehow they were born with this inherent ability to use it. So it's a problematic proposition that we in higher education and school education have to grapple with, because educators across those contexts don't fit neatly into any of these categories, and it's a very reductive sort of way of thinking about educators. So try and get my slides to move. So it's problematic, if we are going to kind of demarcate these generations, the digital native age, whatever you want to call it. Well, it's already problematic, because the latest stats on the teaching workforce, the age in the teaching workforce, is that the average age of lower secondary teachers is 42, and that's the sort of latest OECD data. Then staffing in schools data from the Federal Education Government Department is primary school teachers 43.3 and secondary teachers 45. So even if we've gone, we're a little bit younger, we're still outside that window of the digital native in the teaching workforce. So it means that the average age of the teacher in Australia currently was born before, it comes before this digital native determinant sort of came into being, however you want to put it. So it means that the people mentoring young teachers in schools currently and teaching in pre-service teacher education as well, and the pre-service teachers that we're now working with were also taught by people that don't fit into that category of the digital native. So even if we were to believe that the notion of the digital native was an effective way of talking about this, there's a massive gap here, and what we've got now is this really interesting and problematic cycle where even if we've got this whole generation from the last sort of 40 years of people growing up in this digital environment, this saturated environment, we would think, and we are assuming, that they can use this technology, but the fact of the matter is that they're not, and they don't know how, and no one's teaching them how, because they either fall into one of a range of categories which I could speak about forever. But I think that what's really kind of what this means for us as teacher educators is that we're working with a generation of teachers who we're told are digitally literate because they're from that predominantly, with some exceptions, from that digital native kind of age or era or whatever you want to call it. But it's created this kind of disjuncture, right? And what we're seeing, and this is something that I'm really observing in teacher education now, is that where mentor teachers in schools are assuming that the pre-service teachers that are going out into schools are going to come with this whiz-bang wonderful technology, and they're going to learn all of this stuff about technology and how to use it effectively in schools. And pre-service teachers are going out with the assumption that they're going to learn how to use technology in schools because the technology that they need to engage with is in the school, not at the university, because what they're not seeing is university teaching, by and large, being done in the most relevant digital formats and using the most relevant digital platforms. So the pre-service teachers are in this really sort of difficult position at the moment, because they're being told from one angle that they'll get it in schools, and schools are saying we'll get all of this brilliant cutting edge teaching and pedagogy from our pre-service teachers, which we're craving because we're not feeling confident in this space. And what comes out of it is no more clarity around this, and so there's no great progression that I can see in this space. And so we're assuming that this communication, this cross-pollination is going to happen somewhere magically, but it's not. And what I'm seeing now, again in teacher ed, is my fourth year, particularly fourth year primary education students who I work with every year to do problem-based research projects as part of their degree, their final semester. After they've done all of their professional placements, they then come and do this problem-based learning project where they have to come up with their own collaborative project on something that they've seen that they're still really grappling with. And every year, at least one group. This year I've got 2 groups out of about 14 groups who are investigating how to effectively and meaningfully engage with digital technologies and ICT in the classroom. So despite having done a 4-year degree and done a minimum of 80 days or more, professional placement in schools currently using smart boards, Chromebooks, and all of the technology that has been provided to them, they're still saying that the biggest problem that they can think of to investigate together is how to do it well. So there's a massive disconnect here that really we have an opportunity to kind of address, but it's there, and it's significant because it's something that's not really moving forward. So what this means for schools is that we've got teachers in schools, as I said, who on average not of that digital native age, being told in the discourse that they're digital immigrants, right? So we've created this, I don't want to say we, I don't want to actually own up to having created this term, but this descriptor has been created to other people in the profession straight away, right? And to create these demarcations. If you were born here, then you know this. And if you were born here, then you should know this, right? But it's not the case, and it's interesting, in the whole world that is COVID-19. I had a conversation with an ACT principal yesterday, and I've had other conversations with ACT principals. And what they're saying is that teachers, COVID-19 showed teachers and pre-service teachers that technology could really be effectively used in their teaching, and they surprised themselves. At an academic level, I had colleagues say, "Wow, I didn't realise you could do all of this stuff online. I've learnt heaps. I'm gonna do this next time, right? I'm gonna embed this in my teaching. I'm not gonna do it the way I did it before." But what we're seeing now is that even though they've seen how technology could be used, they're now slowly starting to transition back to what they call normal and are relieved by that. So they were pushed to have to do something really innovative and really different in a lot of cases, and heaps of people have done a really incredible job, and teachers have really, they've nailed it. But they're now going, well, yeah, but now we can, it really isn't my comfort zone, so I think I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before. So that's problematic in the teaching profession. But this notion, again, as I sort of said, of this digital native, it's just as reductive. So using digital immigrants to describe one lot of people and saying to them, oh, well, you grew up in a world where this didn't exist, so it's all right. Like, it's okay that you don't understand, it'll be fine. It's just as reductive to say to somebody that you're a digital native. And in fact, I raised the term with my pre-service teachers a couple of weeks ago, and they said, well, what does that mean? And when I explained to them what that meant, they were like, we don't feel confident in that space. Like, well, that's why we're doing this research, because this is something that's really troubling us, that we feel like there's an impetus for us to be confident and competent in this space. We're not actually there yet. So, and I found my assumptions, because I love playing in this space and just experimenting, and this I'm going to propose as a solution to this issue, is that even in using really simple platforms like Flipgrid, for example, in getting my students, my fourth year students, the same cohort, to kind of engage in some dialogue on this platform, feedback I got from students was that, well, you're assuming we're comfortable and confident with this kind of stuff, like I don't know where the camera is on my computer, and it really shocked me that even when I'm experimenting with this stuff, I've got to actually scaffold that for my pre-service teachers. So I made an assumption, and I was embarrassed by it, that they would be able to just do it. And so I think at the heart of this stuff, there's a real personal an emotional thing going on where people don't feel, you know, it's a little bit like the notion of the imposter syndrome. People don't feel that this is the space that they sit comfortably in, so they'd rather just rest on what they know works because it's always worked, and not kind of branch out into that space. The next lot of teachers can do that, but as we're seeing, they're not actually confident to do that. So we're kind of perpetuating this problem without, you know, doing something about it. So what can we do about it? Really quickly, you know, for me, learning something new, I mean, we work in education, of course, we love learning new things, but I think in the teacher ed space, we need to start, and I say we, and I mean me now, modelling innovative and effective ways to use ICT in my own teaching so that pre-service teachers can see it used hopefully well, but also modelling that risk-taking, right, you know, and learning from that, learning that they don't know how to engage with Flipgrid, and then teaching them, rather than taking it out, actually teaching them how to use it, you know. Empowering educators to, in all sectors, to play, right? To actually play with this stuff. We know how to use certain things. We know the research backs this up, that when we let young people play and get their hands dirty and fall off things and experiment with things, that's how they learn their limitations, right? Same thing applies in the digital space. Let them play and teach them. And I think this is something maybe in the teaching and learning advisory space, showing them how it can value add to their signature pedagogies. So it's not about saying chuck out everything you know and do something new, which is kind of the perception behind a lot of this stuff. It's actually saying what we want to do is leverage what you already know works really well into this digital space to value add to your ability to really differentiate and really dig deep in this space. And so for me, what it means is we need to move beyond the us and them binary, you know, the us as the digital immigrants and them as the digital natives, or the other way around, depending on where you position yourself. You know, it's a more useful conversation to say that we're leveraging technology for effective teaching and learning across all sectors. So on that note, that's it from me. There's my contact details and some references, you know, some very brief references that I've used for today's presentation. Always happy to talk to people at any point. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emily. That was wonderful to hear from you.